Hi, welcome to my tier ranking of 80s shred albums. Just right off the cuff, I am doing this, I'm improvising this, I haven't really prepared anything other than the albums you looked at, so if I ramble from time to time, it's because I haven't really planned what I'm going to say. So what I'm doing is I'm ranking maybe about 13, 14, 15 of the shred albums that I listened to most in the 1980s. I was around when shred effectively started, right up until when it kind of fell out of fashion, and these are the albums that I listened to the most. So there are a few possible, notable exceptions where that I haven't included, and that's just mainly because I either didn't listen to them, or because I haven't included them because I don't consider them to be kind of shred. There's loads of fast players that I've not included. Like Steve Lukather, John Sykes, Gary Moore, people that are fantastic players, some of my favourite players, but they were never considered shred. Right off the bat, you can see that there's no Steve Vai, and that's because I didn't really listen to Steve Vai and his solo stuff until into the 90s. I missed Flexible. I loved Passion and Warfare, but that was 1990, so that doesn't really count. And I've not included John Petrucci because even though the first Dream Theater album came out in '89, I didn't really get into Dream Theater properly until Images and Words, which is well into the 90s. So those kind of caveats out the way, let's make a start. And the first one that I've uploaded, and this is in any old order, is Impellitteri, Stand in Line. I remember hearing this back, and I think it was 1988, and nobody really at that point heard anybody play quite so fast. Even though it was kind of shrouded in a lot of reverb, his solos on this album, they were still pretty face melting. And I also think that this album has got some great songs on it. Yeah, there's a couple of covers on the first side, but there's some great songs, and he's got Graham Bonnet on vocals, which really just adds to it. What I thought was really good about this album was that it was shred, great riffs, but also great vocals, some really good songs on here. This is an album that I still enjoy, even 35, 36 years later, still love this album. In terms of the solos, they are face melting. The songs are definitely face burned. For me, it's definitely up in the face burned. There's an argument it could even go higher, but it's probably not my favourite of these albums, but it's definitely up there. So Impellitteri, a good start. The next one is Cacophony from 1987, Speed Metal Symphony, and love this album. I was blown away by this album the first time I heard it. The harmonies are amazing. The complexity of some of the guitar lines is absolutely amazing. And of course, it was the first time I was exposed to these two guys. They were largely unknown before this point. But some of the lines they play harmonised is absolutely amazing, and you've got some amazing Jason Becker ripping solos, it's like on Concerto at the start, and some of Friedman's weird melodic but exotic lines and stuff like that. Still like this album. The songs are not great in my opinion, but there's some good riffing on there. The two instrumentals are fantastic. So for me, the Cacophony does actually go into face melted. What an album. The next one is Nitro, OFR. I don't know if anybody remembers Nitro, but this was Michelangelo working with Jim Gillette. And I remember this album, I mean, there's some amazing solos on it, and I've got a lot of respect for Michelangelo Battio, as he's now called. But this album is a weird album. As I say, there's some amazing solos on it, but at the same time, they all sound quite similar after a while. Although there are some, especially on OFR, the title track, Michelangelo goes absolutely wild on that solo. But the real problem I have with this, you might not be surprised to know, is Jim Gillette's vocals you either love or hate. And I am not a fan of Jim Gillette. And there are certain songs where he's wailing rather than singing, in my opinion. And the guy has an amazing set of lungs. He clearly can sing, but his kind of his falsetto screeching at times for me, it really puts me off, and I really struggle to listen to this album because the songs are so bad, in my opinion. So, and Michelangelo's rhythm guitar sound in this album is really thin and weedy. I'm really surprised. So even though his playing is amazing in places, I'm not a huge fan of this album, I've got to admit. The next one along is Marty Friedman, Dragon's Kiss. 88, I think this came out, and this was Marty's first solo album. Came just a year after his appearance on Cacophony. I love this album. I always have done. It's not as out there as Jason Becker's album that we'll talk about shortly. But what I love about this album is it's heavy, great drumming, some really cool heavy riffs on here, but of course you've got some amazing solos and melody lines from Marty himself. And I think this is an album that I still listen to. Forbidden City, I love that. That's one of my favourites. Dragon's Kiss, that's a really cool song as well. So I'm going to put this one up on Face Burned. His solos are not face melting, but some great melodies and some great riffs, and it's just a superb album. Next one's an interesting one. So Vinnie Vincent's Invasion. When I first heard this back in '86, I think it was, I couldn't believe how fast his solos were. He was probably considered to be the fastest guitar player when he came out. But of course, having listened to that album, and I still do listen to that album to this day, I'm a bit less convinced about his solos now. Some of his solos are really good, and there's no doubt that Vinnie Vincent can play. He writes great riffs, good songs, really good songs. You know, Creatures of the Night with Kiss, he was great. So I know he's a great guitar player. There were accusations when this album came out that he had sped up his solos in the studio. And listening to the album now, I can see why some people might think that. And if you've watched his guitar instructional video, which I really think is quite poor, he's not playing as fast in that video as he is in this album, and I can understand why some people think his solos may have been sped up. What I like about this album is some great songs. I can listen to this album all the way through. They are great songs. Some great solos on there. Robert Fleischman, I think his name is. I really like his vocals. They're really high pitched, but I really like them. And even Vinnie himself sings on "Is It Back on the Streets," and he's got a good voice. So even though I'm a bit dubious about the solos, and I think these solos, I've got to be honest, Vinnie Vincent's solos, in my opinion, can be quite sloppy compared to other players on this list. I think they're a little bit sloppy at times, but I do like this album a lot. I still listen to this album to this day, so I am actually going to put it up here because, as I say, great songs on that album. Really enjoy it. Next one, another classic, Jason Becker's Perpetual Burn, came out at the same time as Marty's solo album, 88. And this was just, I hadn't really heard a solo album quite like this before. Of course, it's got a lot in common with Cacophony's debut, as in, lots of complex rhythms and lines and arpeggios. This is just a technical masterpiece, this album. Technical masterpiece, and I still to this day, I still think it stands up. And bearing in mind he was so young, 18, 19 when he recorded this, it's absolutely amazing. And of course, people have talked about this for years and years and years about what he could have been had he not been struck down by ALS, I think it is. But amazing album, and this is a face-melting album. There's no doubt about it. So this goes straight up there. And I still, as I say, still listen to it to this day. Altitudes and Air, art is amazing. So yeah, definitely deserves to be up in the face-melting tier, definitely. The next album is Tony McAlpine, Maximum Security. Remember when this album came out? I just love this album, and this is one of the ones that I still put on to this day. Still love it, always have done. This for me is Tony McAlpine at his peak. It's his second album. Excuse me. It's his second album, if I remember rightly. First album I thought was okay, wasn't great. I think he really comes onto his own in this one. What I love about this album is, again, amazing tunes. I love the production on it. Even though it's not great, it suits the tracks really really well. But McAlpine on this, his technique is phenomenal. His super aggressive shredding, his amazing legato and arpeggios. If you watch Tony McAlpine's first instructional video, he's actually very softly spoken, and his picking was actually very, very economic. I thought he was tearing the strings to pieces, but in actual fact, he's very reserved in his technique. But he's just so super accurate in his picking. But phenomenal songs or tracks on this album, and an amazing piano player as well. The piano player, Chopin, I think it is, that he plays in this is amazing, just showing what an amazing musician he is overall. Love this album, always have done, hopefully always will do. For me, my face was melted with this album, so it's going up there. So thank you, Tony, for the music. The next one along is David T. Chastain's Instrumental Variations, which came out, I think, in '87. I have always enjoyed this album as well. Still listen to it to this day. It's my favourite Chastain album, whether even with vocals, it's just my favourite. Maybe it's because it was the first one I heard, but it's still my favourite. Again, great tunes. I think there's some really cool riffs on here, as well as some really cool melodies. Again, compared to some of the guitarists on this list, I don't think David Chastain's his technique was super accurate. He didn't really mute his lines as much as some of the other guys do, and I think some of his playing sounds a tiny bit sloppy at times, and maybe that's a terrible thing to say, but still a great guitar player. And as I say, he was very prolific back in the 80s, produced loads of albums, but the quality was high. So I really like this album. My face was not melted, but I would say that it was definitely burned. So I'm going to pop it into that tier just there. Next one is another Cacophony album, the second one, and the last one as well, sadly, Go Off, which came, I think, a year after the first one. Love this album as well. Again, phenomenal guitar playing by these two guys, amazing lines and melodies and arpeggios and stuff like that. Again, the songs are not great. I'm not a particularly fan of the vocalist that they had, whose name escapes me right now, in Cacophony. And again, the songs are a bit cheesy, but oh my god, the playing more than makes up for it. The production, I think, is better on this album. It's not quite as raw, it's a little bit more polished, but again, phenomenal solos on there. Phenomenal arpeggiated lines like in Black Cat. Go Off itself is just way off the wall. I love that track, it's just so different. God knows how they managed to record that and play that live. Yeah, so my face was melted and still is melted by this album, so that is actually going to go up into the top tier. Okay, so the next one is Joey Tafola, Out of the Sun. I remember listening to this for the first time. It's an enjoyable album. I don't listen to it very much these days. But there are a couple of good memorable tracks. I really like, I think it's the title track, Out of the Sun, the first track. And Paul Gilbert makes a guest appearance on this album. He plays a solo on a track that's name escapes me because I don't have the CDs in front of me. 0 Hour it might be, or something, I can't remember. But he plays a phenomenal solo on that. And it's a really relaxing album to listen to. I really enjoy listening to this album. But the problem for me was that Joey Tafola came after a lot of these other guitar players. He was if my memory serves me right, he was a little bit later in the Mike Varney catalogue, and I think I'd kind of heard it all by this point, so it didn't actually blow me away as much as it might have done a few years earlier. So a perfectly pleasant album. I still enjoy it, but it doesn't tear my face off. So I'm actually going to probably pop it down. I'm going to put it here. I actually enjoy listening to it more than Nitro, so I think it deserves to go a little bit higher. The next one is obviously a classic, and I remember this one really made an impression on me. Joe Satriani, Surfing with the Alien. because it was one of the first ones that I was able to buy a tab book. So I was actually able to, and it had proper tab in it, not just a terrible transcription in standard notation. So I was actually able to work out and play some of the stuff on it. So it's a great album, catchy tunes. Excuse me. It is shreddy, even though it's not in the kind of neoclassical style. Loved the album at the time, played it to death, played it for years, not listened to it for quite a while, but I still recognise its importance, and as I say, I really I was really motivated by this album to try and actually start learning some of the stuff that he was playing that I couldn't do with previous albums because I couldn't really work out what they were doing. So yeah, great album, still enjoy it to this day, so that's going to go up into Face Burned. Next one I listened to death was Vinnie Moore's Mind's Eye. I remember when that came out, 86 I think it was, maybe just slightly before Tony McAlpine's Maximum Security, which was 87 I think. So it came out in the same year as Tony McAlpine's debut, and I really enjoyed this album. I think the only problem I have with this album is it all starts to sound a little bit samey after a while, in my opinion. I really enjoyed the first side. I've never really enjoyed the second side of the album, or the second half of the album, quite so much. I bought Vinnie Moore's first instructional video, and I thought that was really good. I actually learnt a few things from his video. Again, I really enjoy his legato. I thought his legato was fantastic. Some really cool arpeggiated lines as well. So this was an album that I really enjoyed listening to at the time. Don't listen to it quite so much now. So I would say this is a difficult one. I don't want to have too many up here, so I'm going to pop it into Face Scorched, even though I really do appreciate Vinnie Moore and what he was doing at the time. I thought it was great. I still think it was his best album, his first one actually. I listened to a few of his albums afterwards, a bit like Tony McAlpine, and I was a little bit underwhelmed by some of them. I think Mind's Eye was his best album. Next one's an interesting one. In fact, so two Racer X albums side by side. So the first one is Street Lethal. So obviously that was their debut. Quite a rough and ready album, but it introduced us to the amazing playing of Paul Gilbert. I think he was only 17, I think, when he recorded this or something. And that intro solo was just absolutely amazing. He was a technical monster, a bit like Jason Becker, technical monster from an early age. I guess like they all were, but this was pretty stunning stuff. Again, some amazing legato, some amazing picking. The only thing again with this album is I do enjoy the first side of the album. I'm a little less keen on the second side. I think the best songs are all on the first side. So I love the first side of the album. That's probably not enough, unfortunately, to push it too high. So even though I think the playing by Paul Gilbert on this album is amazing, and I think it was kind of recorded pretty much live. I remember hearing an interview with Paul Gilbert where he said that they rehearsed it so much they went in and recorded it really quickly, which makes it even more impressive for such a young player. But again, the vocals are not great. I'm not a huge fan of the vocals in Racer X, so that's one of the downsides for me. So I'm going to pop it in Face Scorched, but as I say, there are parts of it that melt my face, just not enough. But yeah, solos on the first side of the album, and some of the riffs as well, fantastic, really like it. I think the next album is probably a little bit higher. So I think the second album, Second Heat, a little bit more polished. And they bring in a second guitar player for this one, Bruce Boulay, I think is how you pronounce it. So you've got more harmonies on this album than you do in the first album. And I think this is a better album, better songs in my opinion, one or two fillers, but overall better songs. Again, some amazing harmonised lines, which they were able to easily recreate live, as were Cacophony. They could do it too live. So I really enjoy this album. It's like some great songs on it. Again, some amazing stuff. Scarified is obviously a classic in the shred world. So I would say that this is better than their first album. So I'm going to put this into Face Burned, just up there. Two more to go. So the next one is actually Michelangelo's first album with Jim Gillette, Proud to Be Loud. And I remember hearing this one back in the late 80s, and I was blown away by this. I think this was the first time I'd heard somebody play with him again with such accuracy and do these amazing big sweeps, and some odd stuff as well. I prefer this album to the Nitro's OFR. I think Michelangelo, this is actually one of his best pieces of work actually, and of course he was actually a hired gun for Jim Gillette, so it's not a Nitro album, it's a Jim Gillette album, but Michelangelo plays on it. I really like his guitar sound in this album, much better than Nitro. His rhythm guitar playing is better, but some of the solos are amazing, and his actual solo, I can't remember what it's called again off the top of my head. Was it Nitro or something? I can't remember. But it is that is absolutely amazing. That was just phenomenal technique. And I also bought Michelangelo's first instructional DVD. I did learn some musical things from it, although obviously technically he was way, way, way beyond anything I could ever do. But it was actually a really good album, and you can see why he's a good guitar teacher. He knows his stuff, and I really enjoyed watching it, and my face was melted by that Michelangelo first instructional DVD. So my face was melted. Again, the only thing that I struggle with on this album is Jim Gillette's vocals. Which again I find hard to take in places. I think the songs on this album are much better than they are on the Nitro OFR album. So my face was melted part of the time, but Jim Gillette unfortunately put that fire out a little bit, so I'm going to put that into this tier just here. And then finally, one of the guys that arguably started all this is Yngwie. So I've got some real mixed opinions or thoughts on Yngwie. When I first heard Yngwie Malmsteen, I was blown away. Now, the reason I got Trilogy on here rather than the first two albums was Trilogy was actually the first album that I bought, and then I went back and bought the first two albums, and I bought the couple after that. Yngwie just blew me away when I first heard him. I'd never heard anybody play that fast, but also with that kind of harmonic minor or Phrygian style, neoclassical style. So I might have been a bit late to the game from that point of view, but it was amazing. A Trilogy. I heard a couple of tracks on the radio on Tommy Vance's rock show in the UK, and I was blown away, and I went and bought it. I got it for Christmas 1986, and I just loved this album, and I still do like this album a lot. I think actually for me Yngwie kind of peaked at this point, or maybe peaked with the next album, Rising Force, and he never really regained, in my opinion, his prowess. I think there are some good songs on this album for Yngwie, because Yngwie's not renowned for being a great songwriter by some of us, but the playing's amazing. I think some of his solos on this album, in my opinion, are the best he's ever done, like Fire and Fury and stuff like that, those two tracks. And of course the Trilogy suite, which is amazing. And Crying, I think it's called Crying, the instrumental, it just shows you that Yngwie is capable of emotional playing. He doesn't choose to do it that often, but he is capable of doing it. His vibrato, as we know, is absolutely amazing. I personally don't listen to Yngwie anymore. I listen to his early stuff, but I think he lost it once he went into the 90s and he was doing the same stuff over again. I think he became a bit sloppy in places. I think he blew it. But in 80s Yngwie is amazing. And this album, it did melt my face when I first heard it. Still love it to this day. So I am actually going to put this up in face melting, because a young me at 17, when I heard that, my face did melt. Okay, so that is my ranking of the albums that I used to listen to. I know I've missed out a few, but the ones I've missed out is because I didn't actually listen to them either until much later or not at all. So any comments, any views, I'd be interested to hear what you think, and thank you very much for watching.